Well, let me wish you good morning again. I mean, what a beautiful morning. And clearly, you all love Jazz Samba so much to be here instead of out shopping at the local farmers market and so on. I see a lot of faces that I've seen coming to various events throughout the week. So we've clearly been making some furrow tracks in the tarmac on the way to Strathmore. And Georgina said that I'm the moderator of this session. It struck me what exactly the word moderate means, because this particular panel is anything but moderation involved in this one. We've got some really special guests here. As you see as well, we're filming this session, and so you're all in the movies now, which is great news, and so are these gentlemen on stage with us. It's such a kind of historic event to get this group together that we thought it was well worth making that extra effort to do a video of it. So without me talking much more, let me introduce this exciting panel of folks that we have here with us today. And I want to start with the gentleman next to the end, who is Tom Cole. And Tom Cole. Now, Tom, as many of you know, is that voice which we wake up to and enjoy every Sunday morning. His program, G-Strings, is, for me, as a newcomer to Washington, one of the best things about Washington is listening to Tom's program on a Sunday morning. And it's a great joy to have him here talking about really how the Jazz Samba album slotted into popular music and jazz as it went forward after the 60s. Right next to me here is a chap, David Adler. Hello, David. Now, if you look up on Wikipedia or Google Jazz Samba, one of the first things you'll see is an article by David called Give the Drummer Some, which was in Jazz Times. David is a teacher of jazz history. He's a journalist, a writer, who's done an awful lot of fantastic work, and that particular article is probably one of the most comprehensive articles that many of us have read about Jazz Samba, one of the first ones that I came across when I started to research the album. And he'll be telling us a little bit about how the album came to be made, how it evolved into the system in 1962. Now, we have two gentlemen in the center of the room here who are our really terribly very special guests, because the rest of us can talk about Jazz Samba, but these two gentlemen were there when it was recorded. And in white, we have Ed Greene, who was the engineer of that Jazz Samba session. Ed has gone on to have a sparkling career with more awards than you can fit on the mantelpiece, and continues to be working on great TV shows, many of the Grammys and the Oscar shows that he's been involved in, American Idol, and lots of other specials with some of the great superstars of jazz and popular music. And next to him is a chap I had the pleasure to contact a couple of years, and it's great to meet him here. This is the one and only, one of the two drummers on the album, Buddy Deppenschmidt. So, as you know, Buddy was one of the people instrumental in making that album happen and managing to pick up those Brazilian rhythms. And it's a great honor to have Buddy here for this session today. Now, the one person I haven't yet introduced, and it's the person who will kick off today's session, is Leonardo Lucini at the end of the row there. Leo is a musician, a music teacher, a Brazilian from Rio de Janeiro, and a man who has brought a lot of the Brazilian rhythms to Washington, D.C., playing bass with his band Origem, with his brothers Alejandro Lucini, Bruno Lucini, and doing some fantastic music and teaching in local schools. I sat in on one of his sessions where he was teaching kids at a high school about Brazilian rhythms and Brazilian music in Montgomery County. And we want to start off with Leo so that Leo can put us into the context of how did this bossa nova music evolve, and what is it about? What changed between samba and bossa nova to create this fantastic rhythm which we all know and love? So,
well, we would need like a whole semester college course for that, but I'll try to be quick about it. What I would like to talk first is about samba and about Brazilian music a little bit. Brazilian music is a result of a combination of basically three ethnic groups. Is the native Brazilians, the European, the Portuguese that came to Brazil and colonized Brazil, and the Africans that were brought as slaves to Brazil. And one of the main characteristics of the slavery in Brazil, as opposed to slavery here in the United States and other countries, is that the Portuguese would group all the slaves in one place called senzalas, a big house, and sometimes groups of from the same area in Africa, from the same tribes, speaking the same dialect, the same thing, we keep together, or kept together. That allowed for some of these African traditions to be kept over the years. And even nowadays, you go to Brazil, there's a strong African influence, not just in music, but in other parts of our culture. And traditional rhythms from Africa still played and were kept through religion, through traditional Brazilian religions. And the Portuguese, they brought, through the colonization, they were very used to some of these rhythms and some of the practices, the religious practices, because they colonized a lot of the west coast of Africa, and they brought a lot of slaves here from those areas, well, here to Brazil, from these areas. And the Portuguese influence was very strong, and it is very strong in Brazilian music, because with the colonization, they brought instruments that were popular at the time. And they brought instruments, there were guitars and mandolins and other instruments, flutes. They also brought military instruments. And the military instruments was also a very strong part of the folklore in Brazil, especially in the northeast of Brazil, but also in Rio. So snares and bass drums, all the drum instruments, brass instruments. These are all influenced by Portuguese. Also, classical music and the popular classical music at the time, they brought for the court, to play for the court. In Brazil, at one point, the emperor of Portugal also lived in Brazil, and the court moved from Portugal to Brazil. So with them came a lot of music that was performed in private parties and things like that. After the abolition of slavery in Brazil, in the late 1800s and the beginning of the 1900s, a lot of the former slaves who were looking for work, they moved to Rio de Janeiro, which was a big port, was a hub, a commercial hub. They were looking for work in the docks, work that they could obtain as free slaves. And that combined with the workers, postal workers and all the workers in the city, they would get together, and it's a little bit controversial, right? Some people have different views on this, but people get together on what's called Praça 11, which is in the center of Rio de Janeiro. And there was a particular restaurant that they would get together and play. And these former slaves, or free slaves, and people, and the workers that work in the city in different parts, they would get together and play together. And that is kind of where samba became to be. But before samba, there was a style called choro, or grupo in the style of music called choro that was very popular in Brazil. They all played different types of rhythms, including machixe, which is a very typical rhythm of Brazil, which is one of the predecessors of the samba. And as samba crystallized and became popular, especially during the presidency of Getúlio Vargas. Getúlio Vargas was a populist president that a very nationalist, and in the 30s and the 40s, he really tried to promote samba as a nationalist demonstration of Brazil, of the music of Brazil, the culture of Brazil. And that popularized samba. And in the 40s and 50s, there was a style of music called samba canção, which is a slow samba very, very close in harmony and melodies and everything with bolero, which is also very popular at the time. And samba canção and the composers of samba canção and melodies really influenced bossa nova. And bossa nova comes as bossa nova is really an interpretation of samba by a group of young people, very young people in the late 50s, primarily João Gilberto, which I credit me, that's just me, I credit as the creator of bossa nova. And João Gilberto would get together with other kids, they were like in their 20s or younger, and including Tom Jobim and other guys in Copacabana, and just play songs that they like. And they were very much influenced by these composers, that like Cartola, Nelson Cavaquinho, composers of samba and samba canção. They were very, very popular at the time. They were influenced by the harmonies and by the melodies. And the harmonies was not as complex as they became to play, but is that. So bossa nova comes from that samba tradition, and also from the jazz influence. You see, in Brazil, there was a big turn in the Brazilian history, which is before I qualified, before radio and after radio. When American radio stations and radio companies would put radio stations in Rio, in cities like Rio, they were able to get long-range broadcasts. And with that came American music. And they were doing American commercials, American music, American culture was broadcast through radio in Brazil, and primarily through radio. TV was not until very later in Brazil, much later than it was here in the United States. And the radio, with that came a lot of the American music that was popular at the time, but and with that jazz. And of course, jazz has influenced those musicians, one way or another. I would not say that they knew how to play jazz, or but I would say that they probably heard a lot of jazz and appreciated that kind of their style of music as well, and classical music. Jobim was very famous with Chopin and other classical composers, and you can see that through his compositions, how he composes some of his music. And with that, since in my interpretation, bossa comes from samba, from that tradition, I would like to have you guys experience a little bit of samba, okay, and wake up a little bit. Sorry. So, samba is a binary rhythm, so the pulse is primarily in two. And the main instrument for samba is a big instrument called the surdo. Everybody say surdo.
Surdo.
There you go. Surdo is the bass drum. It's the big one. And has a sound like this. You can play with a mallet, and there's a big sound called, everybody's going to say this, tum. Say tum. 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 And then has a dry sound when you put your hand on the skin. That says tum. Say tu. Tu. So you're going to do two, okay? The big one, the big sound is on the second beat. So I'm going 1, 2, 1, and go in and do 2. Dum, 2, dum, 2, dum, 2, dum. Okay, let's do a little faster. All right, 1 and go, and dum, dum, 2, dum, 2. Keep on going.
Dum, 2.
Good. Keep on going, don't stop. Then comes a very nice instrument called the tambourine. It's a small one. It's not like the American tambourine, has no shingles. It's just a small, open on one side, and has a sound. It has a rhythm like this. Go. Tak 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 tak. Everybody tambourine now, and go, and tak 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 tak. Thank you for the surdo. Tak 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 tak. Keep on going. ta, 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 ta. And then come the shaker. Everybody shake it. Good. So that's the primary rhythm. So what I want to do is divide you guys real quick, okay? You thought that was going to be easy, right? So I want to, this side is going to be surdo. Everybody's surdo. I like surdo. And you guys are going to be, let's say to the gentleman with the mustache and the undershirt, from you back from him, you guys are going to be shakers, and you guys are going to be tambourine. When I say 1, 2, 3, 4, we're going to switch. So you guys are going to be surdos. I'll lead you, right? Surdo starts because surdo is the bass. 1 and go, and 2. Dum. 2. Mean it, yeah. 2. Okay, tambourines and go, and tack, 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 tack. Ta, 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 ta. Shake it. More tambourines. One, I'm gonna switch. You'll be surdo, you'll be tambourine, and you'll be shaker. 1, 2, 1, and go, and 2. More tambourines. Tack, 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 tack. You guys are going to keep on going. You guys are going to be surdos. You guys are going to be tambourines, and you'll be shakers. Keep on going. Tack, 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 tack. 1, 2, 1, and go. Tack, 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 tack. Surdo. More surdo. Good. Now back to the original. 1 and go, and tack, 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 tack. Good. Now fast. Ta 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 tum ta 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 ta. Where's my shakers? I lost my shaker. Thank you, shaker. Keep on going. Ta 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 ta. Great job, guys. Great job.
Yeah. Thank you, Leo. Thank you. Well done. You didn't know you were going to work here today, but there we go. Next speaker is David Adler, who, as I say, did this fantastic article, Give the Drummer Some. So, David, put us in the picture of how the album emerged.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ken, and thanks to Strathmore for having me, and thank you, Leo, for that great rhythmic exercise. That was great. As Ken was saying, in 2004, I was new at Jazz Times, and I did a feature on Hank Jones, my first feature, and the second feature I was given was this cover story on the making of Jazz Samba. So I want to talk about that. The catalyst for the article was a statement, a multi-page statement that was sent out to the media by Buddy Deppenschmidt, detailing, it was a detailed narrative about his participation in the album and his experience on the 1961 Brazilian tour with Charlie Bird, and his legal case against Verve Records, because as he alleged in the statement, he had an instrumental role in making the album happen and conceiving the album and actually convincing Charlie Bird to record Bossa Nova in the United States. But he got nothing beyond his original fee for the session. And as we all know, Jazz Samba went on to do extremely well commercially. So I'm not a lawyer, and I didn't write the story from a legal perspective. Rather, I wanted to tell the story about that Buddy told about his experience on the tour, how he went out into the neighborhoods, how he made friends, played with musicians in Brazil, and learned all about this music, and helped bring it back to the United States. And there's one little tidbit that I think I want to just tell this story. One tidbit in the statement, a passing reference that Buddy made. There we go. to an exchange between Keter Betts, the bassist on Jazz Samba, and John Neves, the bassist in Stan Getz's working quartet at the time. They happened to cross paths, and John Neves said, "Hey, we were just in the studio with your boss," meaning Charlie Bird. So to make a long story short, Stan Getz and Charlie Bird attempted to make Jazz Samba with Stan Getz's working rhythm section at the time. And it never saw the light of day. So I have a sidebar in this article called The Phantom Sessions, and I did a little bit of digging into this. I talked to Keter Betts, and he had no recollection of that exchange with John Neves. So I called Creed Taylor, the producer. I was going to interview him anyway, of course, the producer of the album, Jazz Samba. So when I was talking to Creed, I asked him about these lost sessions, and he said, "That's absolute nonsense. There were no lost sessions. That never happened." Okay, so I'm not going to get anywhere with that. So I called Rudy Van Gelder, the legendary recording engineer. This is where these lost sessions were supposed to have happened. Rudy Van Gelder told me, "Okay, I'll go back to my books." He actually goes back to 1961, the end of 1961, and calls me back. And oh, where is this? I lost my place. I have the sidebar in here. So here. Okay, I'll just read from the sidebar. Rudy Van Gelder's studio diaries list Taylor, Creed Taylor, as the client on October 24th to 26th of 1961. Although Van Gelder argues vehemently that this reveals nothing about what was recorded, or if anything was recorded. So what I didn't write in the sidebar was that Rudy actually hung up on me. He gave me this information about his logbooks, but then he felt that I was kind of trying to drive a wedge between him and Creed Taylor, and he got very angry, and he hung up on me. He didn't want to talk about it anymore. So, but I had what I needed. I had the fact that Creed Taylor was listed as the client, October 24th to 26th. Then one last person to call, well, I called Steve Kuhn, Stan Getz's working pianist in the quartet, and thought maybe on the off chance that he knew something, although there probably wouldn't have been a pianist on the date if it was going to be Charlie Bird, the chordal instrument, on the date. Steve Kuhn knew nothing, but he gave me some great stories about Stan, and that turned into some fodder for a feature I did on Steve Kuhn years later, actually just a couple of years ago, for Jazz Times. So one last person to call, and that was Roy Haynes, Stan Getz's drummer at the time. So I call up Roy Haynes, the great Roy Haynes, and I'll never forget. I said, "Is this Roy Haynes?" And he said, "'Tis." So I asked him about these lost sessions, and he said, "Oh yeah, yeah." I said, "Really? You were there?" So he told me this. He said, "I do remember going to the studio at Rudy Van Gelder's with Stan and Charlie Bird. I don't know if it was finished, but before the term bossa nova was popular, we were in the studio with Charlie Bird, that's for sure." So I had corroboration from Roy Haynes himself that there was a session. So I went to one last person to call, and that was Phil Schaap, my jazz history teacher back in school, and the legendary broadcaster and jazz historian, archivist, curator. And he directed me to Michel Ripley's complete Verve discography, and he uncovered 3 listings from 1961. One is just simply dated 1961. There's no specific date. 3 tunes, no tune names, and then 3 master numbers with the letters VK. And then there's another listing, October 25th, 1961. 3 tunes titled Jazz Samba. That's the name of the session. Number 1, number 2, number 3. And then 3 more master numbers, VK master numbers. And then October 26th, 1961, 3 more tunes, also under the title Jazz Samba. Number 4, number 5, number 6, and then 3 more master numbers. And then Phil Schaap emailed me this. "The Verve VK Master Series is rife with mysteries and duplications. It is plausible to believe that the less precisely dated session, 1961, is an earlier listing than either one of the October dates, but there is no data to support that conjecture. I searched the polygram vaults for these lost reels at least 3 times in the mid to late 1980s. I found no trace of them and can't believe that they existed in the Verve holdings. It seems likely they no longer exist." So there is a Jazz Samba session that's in the ether somewhere, and it is gone. It doesn't exist anymore. So that was just kind of an interesting. I had some very interesting interactions as I researched that, and it just gives you a little bit of taste of exactly what happened in the lead up, in the run up to the actual recording of Jazz Samba that did get made. Stan Getz and Charlie Bird, to their credit, knew after that session was made, for whatever reason, the music did not hang together. It didn't work. It wasn't the band that could really bring it off. And so I think Stan Getz and Charlie Bird, to their credit, knew that they needed this man. They needed Buddy Deppenschmidt, they needed Keter Betts, they needed the people on the tour who actually had learned the music and really immersed themselves in the music. In the piece, I also just talk about the, what happened in the aftermath of Jazz Samba, which did so well. Do I have time?
Yes, a few minutes.
Yes, I have time. Okay. So Jazz Samba was a huge hit. So what do record companies do? They try to build on the momentum of a huge hit. But Stan and Charlie kind of went their separate ways, but they each continued to record bossa nova. So we have, Buddy, you were on two more with Charlie, bossa nova, Pelos Pasaros, right? And what was the other? I'm forgetting. Once more, yes. Yeah. And then Stan did big band bossa nova with, there's some amazing playing with Jim Hall on this record, Hank Jones, and arrangements by Gary McFarland. It's a beautiful record. There's Jazz Samba Encore, which is with Luis Bonfa instead of Charlie Bird. There was one other with Laurindo Almeida. And interestingly, Laurindo Almeida had recorded Brazilian music with Bud Shank. Yeah, there were three. I have the third volume on vinyl, and my vinyl's in storage, so I couldn't bring that. But this is volume 1 and 2, Brazilians, 1953 and 1958. So this was well before. And they were, there's in the liner notes, the drummer talks about how they were really rooting this and mixing samba and swing, and also, forgive my pronunciation, but bio. That was the rhythm that they were really working with in that. So that's a bit of the prehistory of Jazz Samba. So maybe we can transition now to talking about the Jazz Samba album that did get made instead of those phantom sessions. And to that, we should probably...
The perfect person is Buddy Deppenschmidt, who was there. So Buddy, tell us about your experience and hearing about making this album.
Well, we had no idea that we were making any kind of musical history. The bottom line is, it was just such a relief to know that we were going to really finally do this after trying to get it done for a year, practically. And Charlie comes up to me one day and he said, "We decided to do that album you've been wanting to do for so long." And I said, "Oh, really? When?" And he said, "Saturday." And I said, "Great," because I wasn't at all nervous about it, because Keter and I had been working on this since before we even got back off the tour. We would borrow a record player from the embassy, play the LPs that we went out and bought, and then he'd bring his bass down to my hotel room, and the two of us would play. And I was still trying to get it together, and even when we did the recording, I have to admit, it's just my version of it, my interpretation of it. It is not pure bossa nova. It's exactly what the cover says it is. It's Jazz Samba. It's the first fusion album before they even started using the word fusion. And we had no idea what we were doing. I mean, we just were having fun playing the music. No charts, no rehearsals, right. Just off the top of your head, jamming, more or less. We would talk over, well, let's start with a 4-bar drum introduction. And I'd say, well, okay, I'm gonna play this. And I would play a little thing. He said, that sounds good, we'll do that. And then, Keter, you come in, and it was all a talk over. And then we did the thing, and the whole session took less than 3 hours, really, because I got there at 11 o'clock, because I had all those drums to set up and carry in. and we were supposed to start playing at noon. So at noon, I was ready to start, and we started on time. And I was out of there at 3 o'clock. I had packed my drums up while they were listening to the playbacks. And I figured I didn't need to listen to the playbacks. I needed to get my drums over to the showboat, get them set up, go back to Arlington, take a shower, eat dinner, put my tux on, get back to the showboat in D.C. In time for the job that night. So it was one of those bang, bang, bang. If you weren't there, if you blinked your eyes, you missed the whole thing. And we had no idea it was going to be so successful. Keter Betts said, months later, he said, "You know that album we did?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "It got a Grammy." And what's even funnier is I was 24, and I said, "What's a Grammy?" I didn't even know what a Grammy was, because I didn't watch television. I didn't have time to watch television. I was always either listening to music or playing music.
I'm not sure it was on television.
What?
I'm not sure it was on television at that time.
Probably wasn't.
The Grammys.
No, the Grammys probably weren't. They were probably radio broadcasts.
Well, it was just an event.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, I didn't even know what a Grammy was. And here we were getting a Grammy, and I didn't know that this record was making so much money for the record company. And nobody ever thought to feed the golden goose, not even feed the goose.
Buddy, could I ask you about the experience as well of working with Stan Getz and Creed Taylor? When you were in the room that day, did you know Stan Getz was going to be on the album?
Well, I knew he was going to be on the album because I came up with the original idea. And I had every 10-inch LP that he made, every 12-inch LP that he made. And I've since replaced all of those with CDs. And I have a carousel that holds about 1,200 CDs. And one whole side of that carousel, it's square, one whole side of it is nothing but Stan Getz. So he was my idol. I loved the way he played. And I said, we've got to get Stan Getz on this, and if we can't get Stan Getz, try to get Paul Desmond. He plays a nice, fluid sound, you know, and this music is that way. The rhythm is tight, the melody is just sort of floating over it, and he would be the best person to get if you can get him.
Mm-hmm.
And
can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you know, since we got that layering of rhythm from Leo before, maybe you tell us about the fact that there is drums and percussion, Bill Reichenbach. How did you kind of come up with something organically? Did you plan it? How? In my opinion, the drum sound on that, kudos also to Ed Greene for capturing it so well in his engineering. The drum sound on that record is just one of the best things about it. So crisp.
Well, Bill had a snare drum, and he was playing this cabaza type rhythm. Mm-hmm. Yep. But he was putting the accent on 2 and 4, which was where my hi-hat was. Right. And I thought, that's not right. You got to put it on the upbeat before 1 and 3. Mm-hmm. 1 and 2 and 3. Right. And it's like a porpoise. You don't see the porpoise down under the water. You only see him when he comes out. Yeah. And that's on the upbeat, on the and. Right. And 2, and 3, and 1, and 3, and 1. And you know what? I'm thinking the reason Jazz Samba was so successful is because Bill was putting the accent on 2 and 4. And the American public was used to hearing da 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 da. They're used to clapping their hands on 2 and 4, snapping their fingers on 2 and 4, hearing the hi-hat on 2 and 4. And Bill was putting shh, 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 shh. It was coming right on 2 and 4. And after I said, no, put it on the upbeat. I said it twice, and then I thought, I better keep my mouth shut and just play the drums. I don't want to cause any problems here. We're doing this thing, and I've wanted to do it for so long. I don't want to mess it up. So anyway, who knows? That might be the reason that it was so accepted by the American listening audience, because they were more used to that, and they could identify with it. So it wasn't that far afield of what they were used to hearing. And anyway, that's about the drum part. And I was doing that clave part. And then the feet are playing like the bayon. The surdo part. Surdo part.
Samba, yeah.
Boom, bidoo. Only instead of just going boom, 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 it would boom, ba-dum, ba-doop, ba-dum, ba-doop, ba-dum, ba-dip, ba-dum, ba-dip, ba-dum, ba-dip. So really,
He knows his stuff.
it's getting back. The bossa nova is like a fusion of the traditional samba, and it was like a hybrid version, you know. And I think that's why we liked it so much. Keter and I were crazy about it. And I was glad I had a little support there, because I needed support, and he was older than I, and he had been with Charlie longer than I. And I said, look, he's not listening to me. Why don't you talk to him? Maybe you can talk him into this. And finally, what really pushed the ball over the goal line was when I said, well, Keter said, I'm not getting anywhere with him. He doesn't seem interested. And I said, well, okay. So Ginny and I used to go upstairs when Charlie played his classical guitar set. She would go upstairs and didn't want to sit up there in a bar by herself. So she would always say, come on up with me, I'll buy you a drink. And so she and I would hang out during that 20-minute session. And then we'd go back downstairs in time for the trio to start back up. And I talked Ginny into it, and she talked Charlie into it, and that's the reason that the whole thing. I think Ginny was the final person that convinced Charlie that this would be a good thing to do. And I didn't care what it took, as long as we did it, and we finally ended up getting to do it after all that effort.
Yep. Thanks.
And didn't even have any idea that it was going to turn out to be so successful. It was just a fluke. It was crazy.
Yeah. Well, buddy, thanks for doing it. I think we all love it. Now, the other person who was there in the room at the time was Ed Greene, who was a recording engineer at the time based in this area. And tell us about the session from your perspective and how it came to be in All Souls Church and how it became such a fantastic sound.
Well, the fantastic sound comes from the stage. That's the truth. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm just there to do my best to kind of capture it in whatever balance. I wasn't in the room. I was in the hallway. I was in the hallway outside the room, and somebody, the Washington Post person that gave me a call, said, "Oh, yeah, that's still there." It was off stage left, and I just set up a little table with a mixer and so forth. Went and listened. And the reason we were at All Souls was I felt that I had a small recording studio. It's something as legitimate music, jazz music, should be played in some kind of a natural acoustic environment. Now, these days you might try and do that with reverbs and this, that, and the other. I still believe the best you can is you don't play a symphony concert in a dead room. You play it in a natural acoustic. And I felt the same way very strongly about recording that kind of music. And I did a whole bunch of stuff, recordings at Pierce Hall, and also at the Jewish Community Center, a number of it, at Cafritz Auditorium, right? A lot of jazz, actually one of Charlie's called "Bird in the Wind" was done at Cafritz.
Oh, was it? Yeah, I remember that with Kenny Pasternak was on that.
Yes, Kenny, and also, but the great flute player from the symphony, first chair flute player. Anyway, so that was the whole concept of doing it in the room like that. And I always like to, if you're going to record something and you're not, first of all, I don't go in with any preconceived notion about how to do something. I'll have ideas, but I want to go listen to music. I want to hear what's going on and figure out, just as Buddy said, they improvised, okay, here's what I have to work with. I'm going to do my best to capture what's there. I'm happy to go into the technical details, but just to give you an overview, I'm a bit of a, I try and push the envelope of good sound. I mean, that's what I still do today. Sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't. But in those days, we're dealing with vacuum tubes, okay? And so I researched a whole bunch of different circuits to put together this little submixer that I used to mix the session, and basically designed it. I had another engineer friend of mine here kind of go over it to make sure I was on the right track, and literally built it myself. And the ultimate choice for that is what you hear. And it was a very, very fine, very simple circuit at the time. If you're going to do good sound, and it's still true today, just do it as simply as you can. I did, not to digress, I did an album with Charlie, and I don't remember the name of it. It was with a trio at K-Fritz. I think it was just the trio.
Was that Charlie's Choice?
Could be one microphone.
No, that was Creed Taylor.
No, it wasn't, no.
I'm just being
Yeah,
sarcastic.
that's okay. No, it was one microphone. It was, that's
I didn't
right.
say that.
Okay, it's one Omni microphone. And I literally went, each time we rehearsed a piece, and listened to what the piece was, and moved the players to balance the group. And it worked. Anyway, this was not this way. This is, I think, was about 6 or 8 microphones. The percussion microphones, anyway, I don't want to get into a lot of tech, but I'm happy to if somebody has a question later on. These are all tube microphones, condensers, all condensers. I always try to arrange it. When you're doing a jazz album, the first thing to make comfortable is the musicians. And were you guys comfortable on stage?
You made my drums sound better than
No,
they
but were you
ever
comfortable?
sounded.
I appreciate that. Were you comfortable playing together?
Absolutely.
Okay, because
And we didn't have any headsets on.
Oh,
or
no.
anything.
There was no...
Charlie was way over there, and Keeter was way over there, and it was an acoustic surrounding. And I mean, we played together.
That's still the best way to make records. Now, these days, you gotta know how complicated it gets with monitors and ear monitors, and it's out of control. It's a miracle anything comes through at all. As complicated as it is.
And a record day takes weeks, not hours.
Well, that's what ultimately got me out of making records. I got tired of doing guitar overdubs on albums for 2 weeks of just guitar. It's just silly. I preferred, and still do, to do a session. I don't care if it's symphonic or jazz or whatever, all at once. That way the players relate to each other. Otherwise, it's just totally unrelated. It doesn't mean you can't make successful records that way. It's just, and that's what got me ultimately into television, and I enjoyed the immediacy. Anyway, let's get back to this album. So I'm setting up in the hallway. They're going through tunes. I mixed it on headphones, by the way. This album was mixed on headphones. World War II surplus permaflux something. They were for bombers. I think that's what I used. Anyway, Creed Taylor sat with me. He didn't know what he was getting. Honest to God, it just happened. I mean, it just happened. I don't think he had 2 words to say. It just happened. And correct me, as I've heard from some of the writings and comments, there was only one song that had more than 1 take. Is that correct?
That's true.
Okay. Only one
You know what Charlie used to say? Somebody would say, "You want to do another take on that?" And he'd say, "Well, I know I made a little mistake on there." He said, "But if they don't want to hear my mistakes, they don't deserve to hear the good stuff." And that was his attitude. And
it's the attitude of a lot of artists that I've worked with, and one in particular, a singer that used to come sing in the middle of the orchestra, and he sang in the middle of the orchestra, and anyways, it's still the best way to record. So that session was done 1 take. The hit song, so we did all these songs. The hit song Desafinado had a problem of time in the middle of it. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, I remember.
Okay, and so I think I said to Creed, I said, "Want me to fix that?" So I fixed it. I just, I kind of counted the measures, kind of figured out where we were in the song, and I made an edit and assembled the album into the form that it ended up being. Put the leaders in, made a safety copy, which I think I still have some at home. Okay, and he left. And that was it. There was no, aside from that one edit and choosing, I forget what the song was, one take of a song over another. I assembled the album, and he left. That was it. And the electronics, as I say, it was recorded on an Ampex recorder, but I was very sensitive to distortion measurements, and I come at it from as much from the engineering as from the aesthetic and music standpoint. So I do the best I can in the time I've got to put a system together that will give you the best of what's on the stage. Let's put it that way. I had good microphones; they were properly set up. I had done all the engineering. Anyway, but at the end of the day, you have to listen. Because the old thing that Leonard Bernstein said was about Lincoln Center originally, if it measures perfectly but it sounds bad, it's bad. So that's kind of the way that all went together.
Yep. Thanks. Just. Just to mention as well, the CD remaster of the album was done by one of the most respected remastering engineers, Steve Hoffman, who in a recent article was waxing lyrical about the sound quality of what he had to deal with, of what you presented, and how well it sounded, how fresh, how real. And I went back to an old friend of mine from Britain, Dave Gelly, the writer and jazz critic, who did a biography about Stan Getz, and I love this one quote, and I think it's something you probably all experienced, or many of you experienced at the time. He said, "Jazz Samba remains deeply enjoyable to this day, but when it came out, it was utterly irresistible. Many of us who were around at the time will remember playing it right through, turning the disc over, and starting again from the beginning." So again, thanks to Buddy and Ed. And
well, I have to emphasize, just as Buddy said, it just happened. And the idea that it was going to be as successful as it was, well, of course, my wife says, I have a kind of a hyper focus when I'm working. I'm listening to what I need to listen to. Okay, that may be different from other people, but I'm looking at it from an electronic standpoint, from a sound, from a playing standpoint, and so forth. And I'll point out if there's a problem that I hear, and we listen to it anyway. But this just sort of happened. Beautiful. Now, there is one other comment. I believe that was originally booked with me at an earlier date with different, and I don't remember all the people, and it was then canceled. It was in the summer. There was another session, never happened. It was originally booked to happen, and I don't remember anything more about it than that.
More phantom sessions.
Yeah, another phantom session.
Well, that phantom session never happened.
So before we go on, there's going to be an opportunity for questions and answers. I did see a few hands coming up, and we will try and keep 10 to 15 minutes for that. But to talk us out of this, so we've gone through the emergence of Jazz Samba, the making of Jazz Samba. I'd love to invite Tom Cole to give us a few words on the impact of Jazz Samba in the portfolio of music afterwards, and the impact it had during the 60s and beyond.
Well, I think we already talked a little bit about how successful it was. The album went to the top of the charts. The single Desafinado got radio play, even though it was long. I mean, it was remarkable for the time. And kind of what I would like to do, because I'm a journalist, is to just ask these guys some questions to flesh some things out, because I'm old, but I wasn't there, and I mean, I remember hearing Take 5 on the radio, which was a remarkable thing, but it was a time when stuff like that still happened. But back when Jazz Samba came out, it was kind of a time in music where you could have popular music and you could have an instrumental piece that, had improvisation in it, and people would listen to it. And I wondered what it sounded like coming out of the radio back then. Do you remember hearing it the first time?
On the radio, I still hear it on the radio. There's a jazz station in L.A. that plays that, and there's another album that we did a few years later, and Charlie's records and whatever. It's I don't know. It's an unmistakable sound.
Oh yeah, no, totally. But I mean, like the first time hearing it on commercial radio, what did it?
I don't know. I have no particular. I spot it. I say, oh, that's that, and I listen to it and say, oh, if we'd done such and such, this might have been. I mean, you're always looking at that. A lot of the projects that I still do, I like to listen to. Off. I will listen to. Well, actually, I've stopped listening to off air because they're often butchered, and I'm sorry to say that. I don't. Let's not get into that.
Yeah.
But it's. There was something about it. The music was. It was not only well played, superbly played. It's a very sensual music. That's really what that album's about. It's a very sensual album, and that's perhaps the essence. I don't know if that's the essence of bossa nova.
Yeah, among other things.
Yeah, and a lot of people have remarked about that it was just so wonderful, calming, or whatever to listen to.
It was a different sound for the time too.
Yeah, but it was the uniqueness of the rhythms and the playing. Very unique, and it's hard. That's why I'm not a record producer. I can't tell you what people are going to listen to, and these days, God knows. It's really.
Buddy, what were your impressions when you heard it on the radio? Was it the album you wanted to make?
I was just pleased that it sounded good. Everything about it was okay. It was correct. I didn't hear anything that I disliked. And I'm always listening for mistakes that I make. The worst thing about making any recording is that you have to listen to your mistakes over and over forever. It's like every time you hear it, that's the only thing you hear, and you're even anticipating when it's coming. And you say, that's it, that's that spot. If I'd have only done this instead of that. But
do you remember thinking
it's
about
like Charlie said, if you don't like my mistakes, you don't deserve to hear the good stuff. I like that.
Tom?
How did it compare to, I wanted to ask you what you heard in Brazil when you went down there with Charlie on the tour before you came back and recorded it, and what kinds of sounds and who was playing, because as David said, that Lourindo Almeida album was made almost 10 years before.
I know.
And
I remember that.
I'd heard stories that it had gotten back to Brazil and people had heard it down there, but I don't know if those are true.
Well, we went out to hear a few groups. I always remember the drummer. And I remember a young drummer named Barbosa, who was playing in the San Pedro Hotel on the roof. And he played tremendously. And probably nobody even knows who the guy is, And it's a shame, because he was a marvelous drummer. Master Bimba, we got to hear Master Bimba, and I got a berimbau made by him.
Wow.
And a lesson in my hotel room. And I actually used that berimbau on a recording that I did with my father with 11 strings and 8 voices and full orchestra. It was really nice. But anyway, the music that we heard down there, probably the biggest influence was when I heard Gilberto records and went out the next day and bought them, and then we just played them over and over and over and over. And the arrangements were written so nicely and sparsely. He used the instruments at the right moments and the right way. it wasn't a whole lot of trombone, but when there was trombone, it was just that perfect spot where the trombone sounded the best. And he was very tasteful in the way he arranged the pieces that he wrote. The thing that we did was just a bunch of American musicians jamming together that liked Brazilian music.
Who
That's
picked the tunes?
basically what it was.
Who picked the tunes?
Charlie picked all the tunes.
All the tunes. All right.
And I didn't even know that Joe was going to be on that date, Charlie's brother, or Bill Reichenbach. I thought it was going to be just a quartet, Charlie Trio and Stan Getz. And I found out that day that it was going to be 5 people instead of 4. Or was it 5? Yeah, it was 5.
Did it help with the complex rhythms having the extra drummer?
Well,
Even though he was playing on the wrong beat?
I can. I can do that, but it was a lot easier to have Bill doing that. And as I said before, he put that accent on 2 and 4, and that might be what really pushed the thing across. Maybe the American public wouldn't have. John Gilberto's album came out on Pacific Jazz, and it went out of print. Why? I mean, that's crazy. It was great, and it should never have gone out of print, but it did. And maybe it was because people weren't ready for that. It was just a little bit too different for their ears.
Yeah, it's interesting because the Lorinda Almeida Bud Shank record is, I mean, it's guitar
I
and
like
saxophone.
the Bud Shank record.
It's great
I
stuff.
played that for.
It's great
I had
stuff.
that 10-inch LP.
Me too.
Yeah, both of them. There were 2 of them.
I got the first one,
Yeah.
I think. But it's so interesting that American audiences connected with jazz samba in a way that they didn't connect with the earlier stuff.
I think it was a combination of Stan's lyrical sense, and it was almost like if Gilberto could play tenor saxophone, he probably would have played it that way. It was the melodic phrasing, and it was loose and flowing, and as I said, it was like the rhythm was, it was right there like a machine, and but not stiff like a machine, but the rhythm was the tight part, and the melodic part was very free, and Stan was a master of that. And he was a perfect guy to use for that.
It's the sensual side of it that was mentioned too. That really, I think, see how Stan gets played. It's just the way
You can spot it.
He was so adaptable. He could just do anything. I saw a video where he went to Israel, and he was jamming with klezmer musicians and all kinds of different styles, and blending right in.
Let me open this session to the public as well. I know that there are questions. For sure,
I would like
there
to
are
make one
questions.
other comment,
So
Ken.
let's take one
Make
quick
one other
comment from
comment.
Ed, and then we'll make a start on the
One
questions.
very quick comment. People say, well, what happened when you listen to something on the radio or something like that? There is, I like to do nice, natural sounding stereo, okay, which hopefully this record represents, okay? But there's a problem with something called compatibility, meaning if you're listening to mono radio, especially AM, is the musical intent of the album, the balance going to come across? And on that album, I felt it did, and it's, it seemed to. But if you ask me what I listen to, it's that. Is this going to work in? Somebody said once, a good mix is a good mix is a good mix, meaning that you can do almost anything to it and you can't destroy it. So anyway, I don't mean
Okay, let's go to let me back to a couple of questions, please. There are so many hands that if you could try to keep the questions fairly concise. I know that can be challenging. Gentleman at the front and in the white shirt there.
This is a question for Buddy about the 1961 tour. I read you visited Brazil, but many other countries in South America, Central America, and Mexico. I'm sure you heard a tremendous number of rhythms and styles.
Yeah.
Out of all the stuff that you heard, why did bossa nova appeal to you so much more than all the other things that you heard?
I don't know. I only heard one other thing that really hit me that I really liked, and that was Metacumbe, and that was a Colombian rhythm, and it was an unusual rhythm. Oh, thanks. It was an unusual rhythm because the cowbell hit on the first beat of every measure, the bass drum hit on the last eighth note of every measure. So as the measure went around, you went 1, 2, 3, 4, boom, bop, 2, 3, 4, boom, bop, boom, bop, get it, boom, boom, get it, boom, bop, get it, boom, boom, get it, boom, bop. And there was that one cowbell beat, that one bass drum beat, click, click on the rims, and click, click on the rims, and beep, boom, 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 bop, get it, boom, boom, get it, boom, bop, get it, boom, boom, get it, boom, bop. That was a great rhythm. And I still want to do, I'd like to do a recording of that.
Ed?
I'd really love to do a recording of that.
Let's go to the gentleman.
This is to everybody. What was the influence, in retrospect, of the Carnegie Hall concert? What was the influence on the popularity of bossa nova and so forth?
And if I could mention, there was then a repeat concert of the Carnegie Hall, very similar, at the Listener Auditorium, if I remember rightly, later in '62.
So how did it influence the popularity and growth of the music?
I don't have an answer for that. I wasn't there, actually.
I was there, but I don't know.
My guess would be that radio really had the biggest impact. The radio play that the record got just spread it beyond everything.
In Manhattan, the music, Carnegie Hall, bossa nova.
What happens in Manhattan doesn't matter in Los Angeles. I was born here in Washington.
Where's Los Angeles?
Gentleman in white.
Two questions. First, Buddy, you had mentioned the Americanization of the rhythm and how that probably positively impacted popularity. But in listening, for example, to the Gets Gilberto album, did you think that was a more authentic?
Absolutely, because of Jobim and Milton Banana, and there were Brazilian musicians. And as I said before, it was just our version. You know, we were influenced by their music, and it made us play a little bit differently than we may have played if we hadn't heard it. So really, what we did was a tribute to the Brazilian music. We liked it so much that we want to do this album so that everybody gets to hear Brazilian music, thinking maybe that it was Brazilian music, but it really wasn't. It was our version of our interpretation of it.
David, you had a comment?
I was just going to, something I left out of my remarks was what Creed Taylor told me was the most immediate catalyst of Jazz Samba was that it launched the American careers of Jobim and Gilberto. He said, like, very soon after this hit, they were in my office looking to make contacts in the United States. So that's a big part of the story.
Second question, just briefly to anybody who wants to answer, is if someone perhaps could comment on what what American jazz the Brazilians were listening to that got mixed into the original bossa nova sound.
Well, I think, excuse me, anybody else have anything they want to say? I think that it was the West Coast harmonies. I think the West Coast jazz was more of a direct influence on the Brazilian music and the bossa nova. It probably had a lot to do with, it was those guys being influenced by what the American jazz musicians were doing, and I think predominantly the West Coast musicians. And you know, you would hear intervals and harmonies that maybe you wouldn't hear in traditional sambas. And that's what was so unique about this new school of samba, the bossa nova.
there's a Brazilian composer, great Brazilian composer of choro named Pixinguinha. And Pixinguinha used to play flute until his group, the Oito Batutas, went on tour, and he saw American musicians playing saxophone. Wow. That's what made him turn into saxophone. That's in the 1920s.
Gentleman in white, and then chap in green there.
Where does Black Orpheus fit into this mix?
He should be answering that question. Joe Lopez over there should be answering that question.
Black Orpheus? Well, Vinícius de Moraes and Jobim wrote the music for the original play Orfeu de Conceição, which later was turned into a film by Marcel Camus, made in Rio. It included none of the music from the play, but all new music by Jobim and Vinícius, as well as music by Luis Bonfá, that Morning of Carnival, and Samba de Orfeu were Bonfá's music. Black Orpheus is a totally other story. The film just really captured visually and sonically the imagination of Americans and pretty much the whole world. Except at the time, the native Brazilian. My question is not really a question, it's a comment. It's about Stan Getz, who said he was a great player, people loved his sound and everything. During the recording sessions of Getz Gilberto, João Gilberto made a comment to Jobim about it as Getz was blowing away. Gilberto told Jobim, "Tell that moron to shut up." Playing too loud. Jobim saw Stan's expression and he said, "He says he likes the way you play." And Getz in response said, "Funny? I don't think that's what he said."
Folks, let me just, this is Joe Lopez, who's also a journalist who has written about Jazz Samba and Buddy, and tomorrow morning there will be a question and answer session with Joe and Buddy in the Strathmore as one of the final parts of this big event and this big day. Other questions? There are 2 questions over there. They'll be our last 2 questions, I'm afraid, for the day. Yes, the gentleman with his hands.
Similar question on a later popular tune, The Girl from Ipanema, Garota de Ipanema, that I read somewhere that Studi Gilberto was just stood in for someone who was a singer, just for the sound levels or something like that, and then decided, hey, she sounds pretty good, let's use her. I don't know if that's true.
That's a myth. It's proved by Rui Castro.
Okay, thank you.
The author of Chega de Saudade, or Bossa Nova, the music that's seduced the world.
Yeah.
Total myth. She had already practiced singing with Gilberto, who was her husband.
Right. Yeah.
And she was already used to singing in nightclubs. She wasn't professional per se, but she had experience.
Okay, thank you.
Glad to disprove that myth, right?
Yeah. And just about for Mr. Greene, about the recording, you said Ampex is what, 8-track magnetic tape with no Dolby? I mean, just what was the...
There was no Dolby then.
Second.
Dolby was just coming out.
Right, so it was just 8-track magnetic tape?
It was one on the original magnetic tapes that had a very extra thick layer to it. We used to do a little trick, a couple little tricks. One was I'd pull the erase head. Since we're using new tape, there's nothing to erase. So it gave you the effect of about, at least to the ear, anywhere from 3 to 6 dB extra noise, noise floor level. And secondly, we used to what they call overbias the machine, because it's not the harmonic distortion, it's the inner mod that you want to keep low. And when you do that, it just becomes a much clearer recording. I don't know if that answers your question.
Mm-hmm. And I know we're really going to run short on time for questions. We have another celebrity at the back, Chuck Red, who was also a drummer with the Charlie Bird Trio for 19 years. Please, Chuck.
I just want to make a comment. One quick question for Buddy, very important. Why were you wearing a tuxedo in a jazz club?
Good question.
Because we were a class act.
Just a comment that everything, there have been times I've heard some comments over the years where some of the things Buddy has said have been controversial in terms of, you know, taking credit from Charlie or whatever. You know, and to Charlie's credit, he had a lifelong passion of Brazilian music after all of this and continued to explore many aspects of it, including going back to Choro. But everything Buddy says is consistent. You know, I knew Charlie very well. Everything is consistent with the way Charlie was. He listened to those people who worked with him. He took advice from them, or he took suggestions. Didn't go out of his way to give all of us credit all the time. But that's okay. But that's all right.
But I would never take any credit away from him because he was a first-class musician and gentleman.
And person, yes.
And he taught me things. One night I got off the bandstand and we did Which Side Are You On? And it had a long drum solo on it. And he walks over to me and he says, "What's the matter? What's wrong with you?" And I had this look on my face. And I said, "Oh, that drum solo I played, it was terrible." And he said, "Well, the people didn't think so. Didn't you hear all that applause?" And I said, "Yeah, but what do they know?" And his reply to that was, "Well, they know what they like, and the next time you think you played a great solo, if they don't applaud, remember, you owe them one."
I've got to go to the absolute final question.
We've heard a lot about the famous figures involved in this great unfolding of music. I wanted to hear from Buddy about Malu Padernas and also Muchinho and all of the musicians that you met who really made this a personal experience for you.
Well, I have to say this. I may have worked really hard to get this album done, but Malu Padernas is just as key a player as I, because they invited me over to her house the next day after our concert in Sao Paulo. And she said, "We're going to play some John Gilberto records." I said, "Well, I just bought those. I have them." She said, "Well, then we'll teach you how to play the rhythm. My boyfriend is Muchinho. He's a good drummer, and we'll show you how to play it." Well, I thought maybe she was flirting with me. So the first thing I said was, "Well, I'm married and have children." And she said, "No, just come on over. We'll show you how to play the rhythm." So I went over. Her father took off from work that day and didn't go to work. He wanted to be there. All of her friends were there. All of her relatives were there. It was like a family reunion, and I was the only one that wasn't a member of the family. And they were just great. And we stayed in touch for quite a while. And then she got married and moved and had kids, and we lost contact for a while. And then my friend Margie said, "We're going to find her phone number and get in touch with her." And she actually found her phone number in Brazil. And we called her up and left a message, and she called back, and we reestablished contact. And so we would email each other and that sort of thing, and phone once in a while. And but if it hadn't been for her, none of this would have happened either, because I wouldn't have had that lesson, you know. And I owe a lot to them for that.
Folks, I'm going to have to, they'll never invite me back to the Strathmore again if I don't end at this stage. There will be the opportunity to ask Buddy more questions tomorrow. There's a few minutes outside before the next session starts. And do use the opportunity to check out the exhibition upstairs of the Jazz Samba Festival, which has been put on by the Felix Grant Archive. It's fantastic, just straight up the stairs there. But thanks so much to you for coming, and thanks so much to our team today.